Hey guys, welcome back from the long weekend. Remember, just as a quick update, that grades will be due, I believe, Thursday. The end of the marking period is Tuesday. That means you have to get your stuff in by Tuesday for me to grade on that time. So if you're confused, if you're worried, if you know your grades weren't great from the last progress report, just reach out to me, send me an email and say, hey, what am I missing? Am I good to go? And I can go back through. I'm checking everything on Google Forms, everything you ever submitted. I have a record of everything. Computers don't make mistakes. Google doesn't make mistakes. Google Forms doesn't make mistakes. So it's all there, and I will have it to enter it in. Okay. So if you're worried that you are missing anything, and maybe you are, you can reach out to me, and then I can send you an email back with the specific link of what you're missing. So I will do the work for you, and then you just have to click it and complete it. So let me know. I want to make sure that you guys do fine and your grades are good. If you remember from Friday, we did start on Chapter 3, Section 1 based on our readings. And as always, we started with a bell ringer that you should have answered in comments. We did look at the objectives, and last Friday we would have described the influences of the Constitution. Now today, we're going to look at the outlined goals of the U.S. government and the Constitution, and we get that from the Preamble. And then we'll also look at the federal and the state powers. Remember, even to pass the Constitution, we had a series of compromises. Remember, we talked about the Great Compromise, having the New Jersey plan and Virginia plan, basically creating two houses. You have the 3/5 compromise. You have another compromise that basically states will sign off on this as long as we have a Bill of Rights, and that's it. We want to make sure that we don't have a tyrannical government like before. So we do get federal and state powers. Our national government can't do everything for every state. Sometimes governors or the state Congress can do things as well. So these are our key terms as you had before on Friday. Also on Friday, we looked at the early colonial democracy. Now, this isn't the end-all be-all for our Constitution. Again, as I complained and ranted to you guys, that maybe the textbook likes to think that like the Mayflower Compact is like exactly what the founders and the Constitution comes from. It's one little piece. In fact, it's probably not as big as many people think, considering a lot of the evidence just points to John Adams, as I said before, just writing in the Federalist Papers that there was one early type of democracy coming from what they say the Pilgrims, even though that wasn't their name at that time, it won't come till later. And they were only a minority of the people on the ship, 30 of the 90 or so. So to backtrack a little bit, we did just look at what they set up, which was popular sovereignty. They're 2,000 miles away from the king. They have to make up their own rules, their own laws. They have to pick their own leaders. That's kind of what we were talking about. So sure, it's an early form of democracy, but we had others. Also in there, I showed you some pictures and just gave you a brief background on the people that were there, what happened to them, dropping like flies, that even when the Pilgrims would land, it was kind of like barren, like everything's already set up. Okay, they do have help from Squanto and so on. You know the story. Hopefully you know it correctly and more honestly and more factually. But they do work together for a short time. Things are good. Things are bad quickly. And they get worse. And we eventually get our first Thanksgiving with the king's head on a pike. Other than that, we also wanted to look at the differences between Puritans and Pilgrims, and look at other constitutional influences, such as the Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights. You have different philosophers, political philosophers in contemporary times back then, and some older philosophers, right? We also get major contributions from the Iroquois, which we admit, and some other colonial influences that were predating our own Constitution by decades or even 100 years before. So we looked at all this stuff just to give you a more accurate and a more honest picture on how do we get to the Constitution, one of the oldest working documents, one of the coolest documents we have. So now let's get into what our part 2 should be, the second part of your reading, and focus more on the Constitution, what it's setting up, the constitutional powers. We can start with the preamble. And preamble just means preliminary, like the technical term. It's kind of like an introduction paragraph. It's kind of like an introduction to like a book, or if you introduce yourself, whatever you want to think of it. It's just basically saying what the Constitution is. It's like a preview on the back of a book or a preview for, I don't know if you guys even know what DVDs are anymore, but let's say it's the summary on the back of the DVD, like what you're getting. So this is a good way to remember what the preamble is. Like if I have a, what is the preamble? It's just the introduction to what it is, the Constitution. Now, what's the Constitution? I think a lot of you have a good idea about what it is, but if we have to summarize a little more for you, it's basically an outline of the government. Constitution in general just means quote unquote body of laws. That is what a constitution is, a body of laws. So think of it again one more time as like the plan of our government. That should help you understand both these terms. Now let's actually read the preamble. I'll read it and I'm going to go back over it slowly with you. So the start of our Constitution, the preamble reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Now, let's look from the beginning. We the people, that's us, that's you, that's me, that's them back then. Okay, in order to form a more perfect union, so we have the articles, we have what we had before, governors and some different systems, right? Each colony is like its own country. So we're going to try to make it better. Let's try to fix it. Establish justice. Justice meaning what is fair. So is this the laws, the courts, the carrying out of laws, carrying out of courts. Ensure domestic tranquility. Domestic as in our own country. Domestic will mean like your own home. Tranquility meaning peace, harmony. Provide for the common defense. So we should protect our people domestically, right? At home, protect people against, who knows back then. You get the British, you have the French, you have some hostile natives, and not just our country at home, which back then it was one of the biggest scares. But let's say, I don't know, maybe the Spanish or French from overseas or somebody else overseas would be planning something. Common defense also meaning anywhere, right? Promote the general welfare, as in like the well-being. What does that mean? Is that education? Is that providing, healthcare to people? Is that making sure they're safe with roads, transportation, police, so on? General welfare. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Basically meaning that we should be free, and not just us being free in 1790, but how about our posterity? Posterity meaning future generations. So what about 200 years? What about 300 years? What about 400 years? Are they also going to have freedom like we do? Lastly, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the U.S., saying, this is what it is. So go back through. It touched on a lot of things, and this is kind of like the general outline. This is a preview of what it's talking about. Justice. We're making a new union. Let's all be get along for the most part. We'll be protected, at home and away. We'll promote general welfare, the general well-being. Does that mean that you get certain advantages of being a citizen here, like free education? And we want to be free, but not just that, we want our future generations to be free. Okay, so it's a nice little glimpse. It's a summary of what our Constitution is. So the goals of our Constitution, which is important for us to understand, is 1, limited government. We want to make sure that we don't have something like the king before, absolute monarchy, or absolute, let's just say even a dictator, or maybe an entire government that's bad. Maybe it's not just one person. We want to make sure that there are limits to this. So we wanted a limited government, and we do have that because we have separations. This comes from our Bill of Rights, remember. It says what the government can and can't do, what we can and can't do. And there's even some, the 9th and 10th Amendments, what people and what the states can do. So we do have a limited government. The next one is a majority rule. This is a little misleading. We do respect minority rights always with this, or at least we're supposed to, and more like 2020 we do. We're not perfect yet, but it's certainly not like 1790, 1850s, early 1900s, 1960s, for instance. We do get better and better, but that's because basically because citizens don't put up with it and they work it out more times than not. It's not always business or government doing the right thing, so a lot of times they need a kick in the butt. But we do have a majority rule. So if a majority of people, for instance, protest Vietnam, well, politicians are supposed to reflect their constituents and say, all right, maybe we should get out of Vietnam. For instance, let's say people want free college and it's a majority of people. Politicians may respect that, but they may not. That's why I said majority rule. It's kind of that way, but we don't have a democracy. You're not voting on everything. I'm not voting on everything. I'm not figuring out laws or leaders. We have a republic, or at least a representative democracy. We're picking people to pick these things. So you cannot say it's always majority rule, because sometimes the majority of the people do agree that they want something, but politicians don't have to listen. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. If we're talking about free healthcare, free college, or some of the more radical things, or maybe it's not radical to you. It's not radical everywhere in the world, but politicians don't have to and listen. Okay, so it's not always a majority rule thing, but more times than not it is. So I just wanted to give an outlying point. The last part is probably our most cherished right, and we're protected by the Bill of Rights. This is one of the most important parts of our Constitution, I think, and I would think most people would agree. This is what gives us power and liberty. And in general, especially if we look at the Declaration of Independence, if you remember it, if the government's not doing what we want, like, why do we have it? Why are we paying for it? You know, we should get rid of it. That's kind of sounds like an anarchist, but it's true, and I believe our founders and our framers would agree to that. You know, they would say the same thing. They're supposed to reflect their constituents. Or one more time, why do we have them? Like, what's the point? But not always. Our founders and framers were also scared of mob rule, and they thought, well, maybe we're a bunch of dummies, and maybe this guy does know better. I'm sure there actually probably are cases of that every once in a while. But it's a close one that we're constantly battling. The political landscape, for instance, is always changing. Sometimes maybe a politician has the right answer. Sometimes maybe the people have the right answer. Sometimes the right answer might be right-leaning. You know, we might need a more Republican answer to this. Sometimes the answer might be more left-leaning. We need a more Democratic answer. It always changes. The political landscape's always changing. Okay. The next part to this is the federal system. This is what the Constitution sets up. If you remember before, the Articles doesn't really have like a great national system. It kind of has just a bunch of states working together. They're more equal, and that definitely sounds good, and it is good, but it doesn't really work for the Articles as long as we remember what we talked about before in the last chapter. The framers had to create a stronger federal government, but also keep a strong state government. Right? It was a big balance. How do you make the government bigger and stronger, but also more balance, also to divide up the powers, also to protect citizens? Well, their solution came with what they called federalism. It would just have something bigger and stronger, but more divided. The Constitution would divide power, and it would have the national power at the top, you know, overseeing everything, but also have a strong state government. The federal government makes laws, and that governs the entire country. This is based in Washington, D.C., right? The offices, the officials all around the world, this is based there in D.C. for the entire country. But then we also have, well, each state's capital, each state's capital building, and in there, all the office holders, like the PA state legislators, right, in Harrisburg. So each state has its own capital, its own constitution, its own state officials. Many times, because of that, the states are more responsive to citizens and our needs, okay? The federal government, you know, they can focus on national problems, defense, trade, and other things. The state, like, they can really work on things closer to home to us, things that we might see and notice more. Doesn't mean that either's less important, but now I'm going to stop there for today. I'm going to give you a short day today. Tomorrow we will finish this up and finish up the last section, and that's all we have for the marking period. So enjoy the, I guess we could say, short day. That's all I have for you. Have a good one, guys, and make sure you email me if you want to make up any back work. See you guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.